Hello, I am Suzanne Tidkemeyer. I wrote for Pathos for nearly 10 years, a column called No Longer Quivering. I wrote about the quiverful evangelical world. I called out bad behaviors. I did all of that. And why? Because I spent over 15 years in a high demand religious organization, Quiverfull Church. Now, I want you to note, I'm not saying the C word, C-U-L-T. Why? Because I happen to believe that that word is thrown around too much. And you will hear as I talk about this how it's thrown around and who's throwing it around and how they have no idea what they're doing about it. It's hard to call a church that, the C-U-L-T. There's a bite model, and if you don't hit all of the main points of the bite model, you can't be called that. So it's also rather disgraceful and disrespectful of people who've come out of high demand religious organizations for them to label where you were going to church or whatever organization you were involved in as the CULT word. So I try not to ever say that word unless it really fits. I've said it more lately because we have had someone making claims about various churches. So, what did I want to talk about today? Someone asked me if I would put down my story of how I left my old Quiverful church and how I ran afoul of somebody who borrowed my story. So it's kind of a convoluted two-part thing. My, I had 3 children with my husband Jim, and in 1995, my youngest and I, and well, actually all of my children, we were involved in a flood in Madison, Virginia, and she became deathly ill. Something called ITP, which is basically your platelets die. They don't have any reason, they don't know any reason why the platelets would die. It was pretty serious, and my daughter was in and out of the hospital a lot, always showing up and having to throw her arm up and say, take blood here, here, or here. And it was a very traumatic time for us as a family, as her and I together, as we were hugging onto each other because of this thing we were going through. It was possibly the hardest part of my life. And it plays into why I joined my high demand religious organization. My husband had a friend in our little town that went to the high demand religious organization church that we ended up joining. When they heard that my youngest had all these problems and we were at UVA hospital, they love bombed me. That's basically what happened. They love bombed me when I was at the lowest, most depressed, most broken state I'd ever been in my life. While I was trying to save my precious child's life, they love bombed me. And that is how I joined. It had more to do with that than anything else. I was broken, is the only way to describe it. Delicious water. So here we are, going to this little country church. My 4-year-old, my 7-year-old, my oldest was out of the house by that point. She was long since out. So it was just the 4 of us, my husband and our children. We joined this church, and the first so many years, it was nice. It really was. We did a lot of different things. I didn't agree with all the theology and all the things, but so many things I just kind of glossed over in my mind. I started to go toxic, I guess, in the late 90s. So after a few years of good church experiences, it started going crazy. I had a lot of things happen that, looking back, I can't believe that I just signed off on them. I'm currently writing a book about my experience too, because it's been and it's been a hard book to write too, because I've had problems with remembering these things. My husband has had to jolt my memory. I've had to jolt his. We've talked tremendously about this stuff. And what in the heck is going on outside? I hear it crash, crash, crash. Anyway, long story short, the church strayed into teachings on healing, hooking up with Bethel Redding in Redding, California. Bill Johnson, we started following that. The church started to get even weirder as it started to do the whole demon possession thing, like Bob Larson. So we had the whole Bob Larson thing going on where everything was a demon. Everybody was bringing their strange little theology and mashing it in. I wasn't going to leave though. I had embraced this stuff wholeheartedly. I had only gone against theology and the other stuff once or once or twice. I had gone against it when let me think about this. Oh, when they tried to get me to beat my daughter. My daughter, with her low platelet levels that went on for years and years, she still has problems with her health occasionally. Was given the book To Train Up a Child by Michael Pearl and told to apply it. Horrified, I read through it and was like, this is abuse. And I threw the book in the trash and totally ignored people who were criticizing me for being hugging on my daughter. We were hugging on each other like all the time for some years. That was probably the first bit of toxic nonsense. But once I joined, I was all in. I was one of those 5%ers. I did everything. I was on every committee, doing all sorts of things. I was on worship team, singing, so many things. And as I got involved, my husband started to pull away. He started to tell me uh, that he had dissonance. He could not justify some things that were going on. He could not sort it in his mind. He was also having a pretty serious bout of depression that we had no idea at the time was physical. He had tumors on his parathyroid gland that was driving this. Church was telling him he was either filled with demons or he didn't trust Jesus enough. It was a whole lot of nonsense that went on there. I didn't know quite what to think, so I didn't say any of that to him. I'm glad now I didn't, because after the parathyroid glands were removed, he was worlds better. It was the surgery he really needed to have. The end got really strange when we got ready to leave. What happened was my husband started attending the Methodist church, the early service, the 8 a.m. service, and then he would join the children and I at our old church, at our old toxic church. And that was noted because he would come in either halfway during worship or during Sunday school. He wasn't getting there when we were supposed to be there. People started to ask me about it, and I had to say, you need to talk to Jim about this. If you really want to know where he was and what he was doing, please ask him. At the time, I didn't really have a good answer for them. I didn't know what he was doing. I hadn't discussed it with him. We did start talking about it eventually, and he said, I'm more comfortable here. I'm going to start going to the Methodist church. It was what I was raised with. Our church had gotten too weird for him. The kids and I still said, well, we're staying here. And he said he was fine with that. And our pastor knew about this because I had a number of meetings with the pastor. And it came down to it. The guy who got us to join, the one that organized the love bombing, is a guy with a lot of problems. I'm just going to throw that out there. He also was responsible for me leaving. Like I said, I was on worship team. I had talked to the pastor and said, I cannot host Wednesday prayer group anymore because it's just me and it's just too much. It's a two-person thing. Most of the prayer groups were hosted by a husband and wife team. That was the rules. So my husband was going to the Methodist church. I couldn't host it anymore. And I was fine with that. He said, we need to move it. I said, fine. I was going to turn it over anyway. So that was our conversation. That Sunday morning, my daughter was sitting, my precious daughter, who was older by then. She wasn't 4, she was much older, in her teens, was sitting out in the chairs in the audience. And I was up on the platform rehearsing worship team. We were rehearsing our songs like we did every Sunday morning before service. I could see, looking right down the hall, that this troublesome church member was talking to the pastor. And I watched the troublesome church member come into the sanctuary and go from person to person to person to person and tell them that home group had been removed from us because my husband was going to the Methodist church with the homosexual abortionists. I saw my daughter crying. She was weeping because he was behind her. He was gossiping with everybody, speculating about my husband, speculating about why I couldn't control my husband. I couldn't be submissive enough to make him stay at the church. Now, that's one thing I will tell you about these Quiverfull type churches. Any slight thing goes wrong, it is your fault as a woman. You weren't submitting right, you weren't praying hard enough, you weren't blah, blah, blah. And trust me, there is nothing I could have done that I wasn't doing at that point because I had done a lot. I had done all the things they requested, even the hard things that I choked over. I still did them. I still lived as a fully submitted wife, and I did everything. And I did not complain, smile on my face. So when my child started crying, that was the end for me. I got off the platform and took her outside. I talked to her. She told me what she'd heard. I told her, pay no attention to the problematic guy. He's an idiot. I went in and I talked to the pastor and I said, you told me, you assured me that if we had any kind of problems with problematic guy that you would handle it. We know he likes to gossip and start crap. The pastor turns to me and say, I'm not doing that. That's your husband's job. And I was pretty shocked to hear him say that because 3 days before he'd said, oh, don't worry about it. I'll handle that guy. So when my husband showed up, I told him, I said, this is our last Sunday here. Our last Sunday. I cannot stay here any longer with all of the crazy stuff going on, the rumors. I cannot have another person ask me how you're doing. And so when the service was over, we approached the pastor and said, we're leaving. This is our last Sunday. Can you pray for us and send us away in good order, like you're supposed to? Just surrender your authority and we'll all be great. He refused. In fact, he tried to get me alone. He told me several times that I should divorce my husband and stay right there, stay at the church. The husband could just faff off to wherever he wanted to go, but myself and the children, we needed to stay. I said, no, absolutely not. I'm not divorcing my husband. I'm not staying here with this, quote, ghostbustery stuff. I'm not staying with this crazy blaming a demon for every damn thing. I'm not staying for any of this. This is just too much, too much. So we left. And right before we left, a member who had been a pastor for a while saw how upset we were, and he prayed over us and sent us on our way. For me, that was the biggest leap of faith I've ever taken because That was all I knew. That was the only church I knew, the only Christianity I knew was filtered through these strange things. And it took me a long time to deconvert. During my deconversion, where I started to go to the Methodist church and have a more normal type theology and Christianity, um, the members of the old church constantly harassed me. I would get emails. You'd see someone on the street and they would either start a rumor about you that would go all around my little small southern town, or they'd attack you. Example, one time I was in the downtown area going to the art studio, and I ran into somebody I knew by the name of Christy. Christy ran at me and started shouting that I had walked away from Jesus and my purposes, and she could not understand how I became an apostate. I talked to Christy for quite some time after that. I went to the coffee shop with her and explained I hadn't left Jesus. I wasn't an apostate. None of that was true. What I was somebody that walked away that could not handle all the weirdness, that the weirdness had become more important at that church than anything else. And she had a better understanding of where I was at when we walked away, but this was continual. It went on for a long time. I tell people that for the first 2 years after we left, I cried every single day. And some of it was pretty horrible, like calling up somebody who was a close friend who I'd taken their children on an international mission trip. They'd taken mine. We were real close friends. Being told, don't call, you're an apostate. Ironically, that same friend now knows I live in Costa Rica here and keeps trying to come visit. And I've rebuffed her, because if you treat me like that, there's no sucking up to me when you see that things are better for me than they are for you. There's just none of that now. So there are consequences, and the church actually fell apart. Most of the members went to another church and took it over, and then that church fell apart. There was just so many church splits and stupidity before it was over with. So I'm looking back and I'm writing my book, and this is all, very interesting to me, some of the things that have gone on. And I've told my story innumerable times before in various places. So it's on the record. I've written about it for Pathos. So here we go. I'm writing for Pathos, and I'm writing about these things. I am writing about churches that don't allow dating. It's courtship only. Our old church was like that. My youngest bought into that and was fully um, courtship only for many years. Well, not many years, but some years. And we carried out so much toxic belief systems that had to be torn down. So I'm writing for Pathos, and I guess I must have been maybe at about the 8-year mark when Pathos gained a new author by the name of Catherine Paulson, who was to write a column called Without a Crystal Ball about raising her child, her chronically ill child, without religion. That was supposed to be the main focus of her blog, and she had been already blogging at withoutacrystalball.com. She came on. She came on to Pathos and started blogging. She started to immediately change her subject matter to the most clickbaity sort of things. And every time she would switch focus, she would create a Facebook group and all sorts of things. I talked to her quite a bit because one of the things that was encouraged at Pathos was when new people came on, they were introduced to a handful of us who were old hands and said, you got questions, go to this person first before you go to me, because they may be able to help you and I'm super busy. So that was how I met her. She was directed towards me. I talked to her, even though she was doing this very clickbaity stuff. She was going after the free birth movement. She was going after so many different people. She went after Jelly Juice. Jillian Epperly, I think, is the lady that runs Jelly Juice. She started to just do these almost hit pieces, I would like to say. And I don't know the exact details. I wish I had kept the correspondence. But at one point, she was fighting with managing editor Phil Fox at Pathos, and there were some very nasty emails exchanged between the two of them. And I saw them. I wish I had kept them. If I'd have kept them, I would have been able to put them up. But I'm not a suspicious person that thinks that I have to keep all my correspondence. So she was let go, and they took all of her content down, which they never do. I've only seen that happen one other time. All my content, even though I've stopped writing for Pathos, is still up. Everybody except for two people that I know of who stopped writing for Pathos, their content stays up. It says it right in your contract. You leave your content up. So I didn't realize it, but Katie Joy, that's what she started calling herself. She started out as Catherine Paulson, started calling herself Katie Joy, took her without a crystal ball handle and moved to YouTube and started doing YouTube videos. That was cool. She kept talking to me. And then in November of 2019, when Homeland Security arrived at Josh Duggar's house, she started picking my brain about the Duggars to the point where I got very frustrated with her and I blocked her a few times because she was no longer writing for Pathos and I still was at that point. She and I knocked heads and that was that. But every time I blocked her because she was pestering me too much, she would turn up with a brand new Facebook profile and go around. She kept putting me as administrator to some of the groups that she started for free birth and crap like that. And I would just quietly unjoin because I just didn't have time for any of that. I have a full life. That was before my retirement here, or right in the middle of my retirement, I should say. So I just didn't have time for that. Ain't nobody got time for that. I love to say that. So I didn't hear from her for a long time after I blocked her that time. Spring of 2020. Here we are in the middle of a pandemic, a global pandemic. I'm here in Costa Rica where all the flights have stopped. There's no way to come in or out of the country. We're on total quarantine. And while we're on total quarantine, in the spring, I had a terrible time of it. I have very severe asthma, which is a symptom of mast cell. I was diagnosed 16 years ago with mast cell. So I was having bad asthma, really bad asthma. And she was talking to me about the Duggars. Catherine had talked to me so many times about coming on her YouTube channel, many times. And I said, yeah, maybe, sort of thing. So finally I said yes. And we set up a day and a time. Okay. I showed up that day and that time. Oh, and I got up very early that day, like 6 a.m., so I could double medicate so I would be able to talk instead of talking, gasping, wheezing. So I double meted. I got up super early. I was waiting with bells on. I sent her a message. Nothing. She stood me up and blocked me. She has told her followers that she did not block me and that it was a misunderstanding and her and I had talked and ironed it out. I have not had one correspondence from her, not one word, since this happened in May of 2020. What I have had is her misusing information that she got from me, like me telling her about the time I met the Duggars and my interactions with one of the boys that led me to believe he was the rumored possible gay Duggar boy. Something I had never posted or said at Pathos at all. She now shouts it out like it's some kind of big secret that she unearthed. she took so much content from me. She constantly was stealing my content, and I didn't realize it until after she stood me up and Steve McRae reached out to me. Steve McRae had told me what she was doing, and others did too, and I saw she had used my content. She had plagiarized a great deal of what I had to say, a lot. And she continued to do so right up until the time a couple days ago she quit talking anything about the Duggars. The Duggars are problematic in their own way, but she has just made it awful by claiming they are in a CULT. She didn't even know what the ATIIBLP was. This is 18 months ago. She didn't know. So she's claiming now that she's been trying to take down the CULTS for years, including that one. She's moved on to some poor dancer named Miranda, who's part of the 7M movement. And she has gone on to her YouTube and called me filthy names and said I was a stalker. Even though there are video clips of her saying that her and I were very good friends, that we were besties at one point. I would like to bust that. We were never besties. She was someone I tolerated because of work. She was not anyone that I ever considered a friend. This year, something even more bizarre happened. Bobby the cat with recaps with Bobby, I'm sorry, unearthed a video of her talking about her experience at church because she told me she had joined a evangelical church for a couple of years and had basically left it when they refused to financially and physically support her special needs child, her chronically ill child, that she left, and that she had been one of the 5%ers that had been doing Sunday school and various things. And she told me that story, and I believe that's the truth. That was her first version of her leaving her church. The second version that Bobby the cat unearthed, she told my story. She used some of my same words, what I just explained about my church. She even claimed that they told her to divorce her husband. But she called it rock and roll church, which I can tell you, contemporary worship music is never called rock and roll church. But she used so many of the stories I told about my leaving. They suddenly became her story. This week she told a third story, which was completely different than story 1 or story 2. So I just want to be very clear about that and point out she's told three very different stories about how she left her church. And one of them she plagiarized directly from me. So why am I even speaking out about this? Because when people do these things, when they are disingenuous, when they take your hard work, your story, your life story. I cannot tell you how badly it hurt when I discovered she had done this. I was like hyperventilating and crying. My poor husband didn't know what to do because what I went through was so awful. Like I said, I cried every day for 2 years over the behavior and treatment I was receiving from people that had sworn they were my dear brothers and sisters not long before. So to have somebody else just walk away with your story and just incorporate their own, it's awful. I actually talked to my lawyer here about possibly taking her to court over it. I was that mad. And because I'd have to hire 2 attorneys, it would be a mess. I would rather just warn everybody. Now, what was really comical about my relationship with her is earlier this year, or was it late last year? I can't remember exact date. We all received, a bunch of us, including Steve McRae and myself, received letters from her attorney. We all received emails that basically said that we had to turn over any correspondence with her or Steve McRae and any number of things to her attorney, and then maybe we'd be sued. I basically told her attorney, show up with a court order and I will give you what you want. I didn't tell him that she had erased all of our conversations. Nothing was saved. I had nothing. She had erased every single Facebook interaction we had. Just gone. So he's really barking up the wrong tree. I have nothing to give him. And a search of my computer would confirm that I have nothing. So this is what people are dealing with, and this is why I'm speaking out against it, because I don't want anybody else to get caught by this horrible woman, to be exploited, to be used, to have your story, your authentic self hijacked to by somebody who is only interested in clicks and coin. She just wants your story to make money, and she will invent the C word. She will invent those. She will look at regular churches and claim them and say, oh, that's CULT. She will put up pictures of mystery churches and call them by the name of some church that she's mad at. This is a woman that exists. One of her main goals is to tear down Christianity. She did a video the other day where she was flipping through her Bible. It was a farce. It was an absolute farce. I don't think she ever was a Christian. Of course, I don't know what happened during those couple of years. Maybe she was. Right now, she exists strictly to tear it down. Now, I know I have been extremely critical of some aspects of evangelicalism, and I probably will continue to be critical. I am still a Christian. I'm just a very different Christian than what I was. And I can smell fakery from a mile away. And that's what we have going on with her. She's faking being something to exploit other people, because that's what she does. She does not tear down CULTs. She does not help victims. None of that. In my years at Pathos, I sat beside so many people over the phone, in person, over the internet, and held their hands as they told me their story, their traumas, as they spilled their traumas out. They call that trauma dumping, and it was okay because I was strong enough to take it. Especially then, I was strong enough to take it. Now, not so much. I have a lot of health concerns that are giving me issues, so I'm not, and I'm not no longer really working in that. So I'm referring anybody trying to do that to their local mental health facilities, because the most important thing you can do if you are struggling with a high demand religious organization and leaving it, the best thing you can do is to get therapy. Get therapy. I got therapy. My children got therapy. My husband got therapy. We all got therapy when we left. My friend Cindy Kunzman can tell you, she's had therapy leaving. So many of us have, and I mean massive amounts of therapy, to be able to sort what happened to us and put it into some kind of logical order, and to feel like less than dirt. Not to not feel like less than dirt, I should say. Because when you leave, they're going to throw some pretty big rocks at you, and you're going to hear words coming out of the mouths of Christians you would have never believed. When I was writing, and now that I'm talking on YouTube, and this first one for Instagram, I always get Christians that come at me, and there are always dirty words thrown or very rudeness. I just move all that to my blog, Jerks for Jesus, and answer them there. I can't believe the disgusting behavior of some people that call themselves Christians or fundamentalist Christians or evangelical. It's off-putting, and I don't think it's anything that Jesus had anything to do with. So there's that. So be well. Get therapy if you're struggling. Please get therapy. Many communities have income-based therapy clinics where you could be seen and not pay an arm and leg for therapy. Just don't run to Katie Joy and tell her your story. Don't trauma dump on her. She is not qualified in any way, shape, or form to help anybody. She has not been through it. She barely understands it. She exploits it. She will take your story and exploit it for clicks and coins. The only thing she cares about is money. And I'm hoping she gets hit in the pocketbook. She and her little stupids is what I call them because I'm just done with all of them. Like to throw at those of us that are smaller creators that we're just jealous of the amount of money she's making. For me, that's not even an object. I am not even caring anything about that. I'm living in this fabulous mansion with a pool and hot tub in the back, a guest house. Money is the least of my concerns at this moment. It hasn't been for probably 5 or 6 years now. And when they start saying, you have no subscribers and you're just jealous of the amount of money that she's making, all I can say is dream on. I just want to make sure that survivors of high demand religious organizations are not exploited for money. That is my entire goal with this. I'm hoping that this is the last time I have to talk about her for a while because it is wearing and worrying. I'm going to go. That's all I really had to say. I wanted to explain my story. I wanted to explain how somebody else exploited my story and how we ended up here. But here we are.